Hello, everybody. I'm holding up my advanced reading copy of the Vietri Project, which is by Nicola Derobertis. Is it Theye or Theye? How do you pronounce it, Nicola?
Thigh like the leg.
Theye like the leg. What is it? Is it
It's Italian. Derobertis is Italian, and then Thigh is German, but
right?
like Ellis Island German, probably. Like,
Got it. Well, a really international name for an author who's going to take us from the United States to South America and to Italy, where she's going to explore family secrets and present to us much history of Italy during the war. Interestingly enough, we launched Lisa Scatolini's historical novel, Eternal, last Saturday, which is set in Rome among 1937 and so forth, and brings to light much of the story of the Jews in Rome. So this is our week, I guess, for Italian World War II stories. And with her is Melissa, who is going to be our interviewer, and it's Rivero. Is that not right, Melissa?
yes.
Right. So she has penetrating questions, and it's going to be a sparkling conversation, and Patrick will be doing the Facebook, and I'm going to go and lie down with my dog. So thank you all very much for joining us. Patrick, over to you.
Hope you feel better.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, hey guys, it's great to have you both here, and let me give you both the good old formal introductions that you deserve. I'll start with you, Melissa. Actually, Melissa Rivero is the author of The Affairs of the Falcons, which won the 2019 New American Voices Award and a 2020 International Latino Book Award. The book was also longlisted for the PEN/Hemingway Debut Novel Prize, the Aspen Words Literary Prize, and the Center for Fiction's First Novel Prize. Born in Lima, Peru, and raised in Brooklyn, she's a graduate of NYU and Brooklyn Law School. Melissa currently works as in-house legal counsel at a startup. She still lives in Brooklyn with her family, con su familia. And look forward to hearing about your work. And I'm assuming that you have some work in progress that you can tell us about too. Nicola Derobertis Theye, got it right, was an emerging writing fellow at the New York Center for Fiction, and her work has been published in Agni, okay, Electric Literature and LitHub. A graduate of UC Berkeley, she received an MFA in creative nonfiction from the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, where she was the fiction editor of its literary magazine, Ecotone. That's a cool name. She's a native of Oakland, California, and lives in Brooklyn, New York. So you guys are both neighbors, or in the same basic area?
Sort of. We used to live 2 streets away from each other, actually, but now we're in different parts.
All right. But for those of you watching on Facebook, Nicola's brand new book, is it the Vietri?
Yep.
Is that the right pronunciation?
Yep.
Vietri Project is just getting raves from all over. And it's always so exciting to talk to a debut novelist at the height, at the beginning of what's going to be an important career, where I'm sure. And also, it's just very exciting. And I'm glad that Melissa has volunteered to come in and talk to you. I gather you guys are friends and know each other well. So I'm gonna be lurking in the background because I have some questions too I want to throw your way. But I'll turn it over to you, Melissa, for right now. But for those of you watching on Facebook, if you have questions for Nicola or Melissa, just go ahead and put them in the comments field, and I'll do my best to kind of do double duty and monitor those questions as they come in. But let's just keep it informal and have fun. So Melissa, over to you.
Thank you, Patrick. Nicola, I'm so excited to do this with you. The Vietri Project is the book. You can purchase it at Poison Pen. Right. And you should, because it is a beautiful, beautiful book. We can talk about Gabrielle and all of that. But first, I just wanted to say congratulations, Nicola. It's such a huge accomplishment. And, we've known each other for several years now. And I am just like always in awe whenever I see one of our cohorts, like a member of our cohort, get published. but it was just a wonderful read, and I'm just so happy for you, and happy to be here. I put on earrings for you. I know you can't smell it, but I put on perfume. And yeah, and yesterday I did take a peek at your event with Hillary. So I got my pathos because I saw you had your.
Thank you so much, Melissa. I literally borrowed this plant from my husband's office. But thank you so much for being here. I so appreciate you doing the event with me. And for everyone watching, Melissa and I were Emerging Writers Fellows at the New York Center for Fiction 6 years ago. And, at the time, both of us were unpublished with a group of other unpublished writers. And then Melissa's beautiful, beautiful novel, The Affairs of the Falcons. Oh, wait, sorry, it's a mirror. I forget. Is right there. It's an amazing novel that everyone should also purchase from Poison Pen. But I'm so thrilled we get to talk to each other because we have very different books, but your book was so incredible, and I was so in awe of what you accomplished. So
thanks. Well, Gabrielle is quite an interesting, and listen, when I had my quarter life crisis, I went to law school, which is a big mistake. I should have just gone to Italy, right? But she did. But can we, I mean, she was someone who I wanted to follow. I wanted to be on her journey through South America and in Italy, but really I wanted to be on her internal journey. Mm-hmm. I wanted to know so much about what made this woman click and what she feared. And mm-hmm. to me, and what it was that she was trying to find in all of her adventures, and then trying to find Vietri. Mm-hmm. So one of the questions I had was, who did Gabrielle come first, or did Vietri come first?
Oh, that's such a good question. I think they really came together, but probably more Vietri. I wrote the opening chapter 10 years ago. I just realized the other day when I went back and did the math, but I was working in an independent bookstore in Berkeley that focused on academic books that was quite similar to the one that's in the first chapter. And there was, there were all sorts of interesting customers. So I sort of had this idea for this customer overseas ordering all of these books. But it's sort of, it's literally a scientific principle, right? I forget what it's called, but it's like you can't have something strange without someone to observe it. So almost as soon as I was writing about Vietri, I was writing about the person, Gabrielle, who was processing his book orders and wondering about him, because I think it's more interesting, or at least I knew I wanted to write about the search for him and not just him himself. I wanted there to be that filter.
So did you have Vietri, him as a character? Did you ever write him?
I mean, in mostly what's in the book. And, I think at the beginning it was mostly being inspired by these really sort of esoteric books. Most of the books I mention in the book are real books also. So those were really capturing my imagination at that time. But do you mean did I write scenes with him and then cut them?
Yeah, so sometimes when I write, I tend to write the character, and then I may put the character in a scene, or I may not. I may decide not to put the character at all, but I have an idea of what the character is, not so much the action that's happening. So I was just wondering if how Vietri seemed, or if it was just a journey that was sort of what it was that you were looking to get.
Yeah, I think I did write, what had happened to him, which is sort of revealed throughout the novel, but also him. But I didn't include that. I wasn't super formal about it. I'm not one of those people that does a character chart or anything like that. Uh-huh. But I did sort of have all of these pages that didn't end up in the actual novel that sort of went a little more in depth into that.
Mm-hmm. And what about, how did you find Gabrielle? Like, how did you get to know her?
Right. So I love that you mentioned the quarter life crisis, because I sort of forgot that that's right. That's 25. That's like, something that we talk about in our culture, if it's not a full-blown cliche. But I was describing this book really early, like one of the first people I talked about to it who hadn't like read the whole thing, or she had read the whole thing. But anyway, when I was first meeting with my eventual agent, Julie, we were talking about it, and this phrase came out, that I just said, this is basically everything I have to say about being 25, which I hadn't really thought about while I was writing it. I think I started writing it when I was 28. And then by the time I finished it, now I'm 35. So, publishing takes a really long time, but writing it took a really long time. And I think a lot of the like emotion she goes through felt familiar to me, or ones I'd witnessed in friends of mine, or people I knew and that I wanted to explore. But really early on in writing that character, she was sort of very similar to me. Like, she's from Northern California. She went to UC Berkeley, worked in an independent bookstore while doing that, worked the same job after college. So I really felt like I needed to, and the details of our family background are quite different, but really early on, since it's a first person narrator, I felt like I had to make some character choices that like I would never do, or I had never done, just to sort of like have a sharp mental break from this character that I was writing. So in the first chapter, this sounds really silly, but I had her order a Diet Coke, which I would never do. I like the regular Coke. And then I had her cheat on her boyfriend, which is also something I've never done. And I felt like that what gave me enough, like, okay, this is a different character than me. She makes different choices than I would make. And then I was really able to like imagine her as her own person.
Mm. Yeah, she when she cheats on her boyfriend, I was like, oh yeah, I get that. I have never done that either, but like I totally am like, oh yeah, I get that. And that kind of launches her into like her journey, not entirely, but that's sort of like it's indicative of her character and some of the rationale behind why she goes on this journey, right?
Yeah.
So what, and sorry to like, I'm sorry if I'm like not asking questions in a linear fashion, but what research went into both of them, both like Gabrielle, you just said it was a little bit like you started off sort of with some things that were familiar to you, but like how did you, or did it require no research? Were you just sort of following her?
Oh gosh, so much research. Lots of research. Yeah, I did a lot of research, and I literally just taught like a weekend class on how to research. And I still look back, I'm like, how did I do all that research? From the first thing, it was that I was writing a novel set in Rome. After the first chapter, the whole thing is set in the city of Rome, with maybe a 2-page exception. But I had only been to Rome for like 3 days in college. And so I was kind of freaking out. I didn't really know how I was going to do it. And I just read a lot. Google Street Maps had like that car driving around, so you could literally go to intersections and like walk around on the internet. I did a lot of that. I'm trying to remember what else I did. I just tried to be a sponge and like absorb everything I could. Also, for that character, her mother is schizophrenic. My mother is not, fortunately. And so I had a friend who had that experience. So I drew a little bit on her experience, but I also did a lot of research and reading. And, there's lots of weirdly like YouTube videos now where people talk about their experiences that were really compelling and a really great source of information. That are like personal testimonies, both people with schizophrenia and people with family members with schizophrenia. But primarily it was historical research, because I knew one of the things I wanted the book to do was sort of like be a primer for 100 years of Italian history, that if you read it, you kind of come away with like the arc or the big takeaways, more or less, from their colonial exploits that were often extremely violent and have sort of these horrible episodes to World War II, to what happened to Italian prisoners of war after World War II, to the years of lead, and up through the current moment, and the post-financial crisis and how that was so devastating to a young generation, and also the refugee crisis, which I think is the big sort of moral crisis facing Europe. I mean, also America, but specifically Italy is really at the forefront of that for Europe in the last decade or more. And so a lot of research went into the like very historical parts, and a lot of that I was able to do online and reading and books and things. But there's a library in New York called the Schomburg Center that has a lot of African history and those primary materials, and that was a huge source. And it was weird, even though most of them were in Italian, because they were about Italy or Ethiopia. They were at that library, so that was also a great resource.
Yeah, it's incredible that we have access to that stuff here. Wait, so how many years did you spend like researching? Like, did you do it throughout the 10 years?
No. Okay. So when I say I wrote it, the first chapter 10 years ago, that's true. But then I went to graduate school and I wrote a different book. And that book took me about 5 years.
Okay.
That book did not get published. It went into a drawer. And, I think a lot of writers have that experience where, that was the book I needed to write, but it was not the book that wanted to be published first. And so it was right at the time that I got the fellowship at the Center for Fiction with you that I had just finished that book. I got the fellowship based on the novel, and it was sort of like, okay, this is the time to turn to this book and to write it. So this book took about 5 years to write also.
Wait, so how much had you written when we got the fellowship?
I probably had written like a chapter or two, like not like clean chapters. I totally write with like fragments. I probably had like 20 or 30 pages, and they were a mess, but.
Wow, that's incredible though, how like the fellowship kind of like pushed you to like finish this and like have this book out in the world. It's really incredible. So is that, because I was going to ask, like, I know that you have like an MFA in nonfiction, like how did you even start this to begin with? Was it simply just like your curiosity for like the customers at the bookstore, and then you were just like, let me just write a novel about it? Like, why not a nonfiction piece about it?
That's a good point. I mean, I went to graduate school for nonfiction because I wanted to write a memoir, and I did write that, but I also knew that I like wasn't going to like write memoirs my whole life. Like I had like that one book in me. And I intentionally went to an MFA program where you could do a lot of cross-genre things. So I took a ton of fiction classes while I was there, and fiction workshops, and studied with some really wonderful fiction writers while I was working on a nonfiction project. So I felt like I was able, luckily, to absorb all of that. And then in terms of I've always read more fiction than anything else. And that was always, where my heart lay. So it was sort of very natural for me to go back to it. And then the other inspiration, I talk about the bookstore and the customers and the books inspiring that, but the other big impetus for me was that when I was 25, right when I moved to go to graduate school, speaking of quarter life crises, I had just been granted Italian citizenship. And I'm only a quarter Italian, but my mother figured out we were eligible. So she had spent a couple years, collecting all the documents. We applied to the consulate. We waited like 2 years for an appointment. It was, as bureaucratic as you would think it would be, it being Italy. They want like stamps and documents that like don't exist sometimes. And then you just hit a brick wall and then you have to overcome it. So that sort of process both literally fed into like the search for Vietri, because she does sort of request records along her journey. But also I got this passport and it was like citizen of like La Repubblica Italia. And that felt so insane to me, to suddenly be a citizen of another country. And I really wanted to explore, what was I taking on in accepting this citizenship? I felt very, I had come of age politically during the Bush years, like after the invasion of Iraq, and I felt very deeply, a sense of shame for, the invasion of Iraq, and pick your poison from the history of American political actions. But so that's something that I had always sort of sat with. And then suddenly I was a citizen of another country that I felt like I really didn't know very much of the history of. So the other impetus very strongly was wanting to research Italian history, or to sort of tell that story to myself about what that would mean to be an Italian citizen.
Yeah, and a lot of the history that you touch on here is stuff that I did not know, and stuff that we don't learn about here, right? It's you tell it in such a way that is it. You're taking into you're literally going into those moments too. This is what it felt like to me. That I was also going back in time and seeing some of the things that could have potentially happened to Vietri, or that he may have witnessed. Yeah, it's like is that all the stuff that you found at the Schomburg?
Yeah, yeah, a lot of it was at the Schomburg. I mean, I didn't only research there, but yeah, that was a lot of it.
And you didn't go to Italy at all during?
Oh, I did go to Italy. Yeah, so I got myself to Italy. I have not only spent 3 days in Rome. So at the beginning, I was living in New York, and I had only been to Rome for 3 days. But then I got promoted, and I was working in an industry that went to. I work for a publisher now selling translation rights, and those are organized in non-pandemic times around international book fairs. So there's London and Frankfurt. So I suddenly had a job where my company was paying for me to fly to Europe twice a year, and you could take a few days after and travel. And so yes, and then my mother ended up moving to Brescia, which is in the north of Italy, to get a PhD. And so she was there for 3 years, and I was able to visit her several times. So I was eventually able to spend a lot more time in Italy.
Okay. I'm sorry, Patrick, you had a question?
Well, I was just going to say, just maybe for the people who are watching, can you give us sort of the basic setup of the book, telling us as much as you can? I don't want you to give any spoilers away.
Sure. Yeah. So the book is about a young woman, Gabrielle, who is 25, and she's working in a academic bookstore in Berkeley, and she becomes intrigued by the orders of this customer, Signor Vietri in Rome, who orders sort of hundreds of books at a time that are all very sort of esoteric and very specific. And she sort of becomes fascinated by who he is, what he's ordering these books for. She's not really able to find anything out online. He's not a librarian or a professor or anything like that. So it just sort of lodges in the back of her mind, who he is and what he knows, about life and how to live it. And so she eventually, as Melissa and I were talking about, leaves the Bay Area, leaves her boyfriend, and goes traveling for several months in South America. And then she winds up in Rome and decides to try to find Vietri. Rome is also the city her mother is from. Her mother is Italian, and was diagnosed with schizophrenia in her childhood. And this is sort of a very scarring incident for her. Her mother was eventually institutionalized, and she has sort of this threat of mental illness hanging over her as well, because especially for women, schizophrenia can often manifest much later, until the age of 30, and it's a 10% chance. So this is sort of the reason she feels a little detached from her own life. But of course, Rome is full of her aunts, her mother's sisters, and her cousins, and it's sort of this very large web of Italian family that she's also feeling a little reluctant to be drawn into. But eventually, as she's researching Vietri's life, she's not able to find him. So she starts just trying to find out who he was, what form his life took. She also becomes reabsorbed into her Italian family as well. Is that, Melissa, did I leave anything out?
No, you didn't.
Don't they refer to Italy as kind of the forgotten front when it comes to World War II? It has not gotten the press, the attention in literature that it deserves.
Mhm.
But I also wanted to ask you, as a lifelong bookseller, so much of what you're saying about, I got to be careful of what I say because I'm sure some of my customers are watching here. But you meet fascinating people, and eccentrics and literary people, and there's something very, very intimate about the relationship you have by what they read, what their interests are, and communicating with them in that respect. Sharing, selling books, and I don't know. Has either of you seen 84 Charing Cross?
That's so funny. I did an event last night, and my conversation partner asked if I had seen that movie or read the book, and I hadn't. And I was like, I wish someone had recommended this to me while I was writing this book because it
seems
so
like
relevant,
right up your alley. Yeah, it's about a woman who has this relationship with a British bookseller, and I believe she lives in New York. Anne Bancroft plays her in the film, but it's a very short little epistolary novel about this relationship, and they really connect through, in this case, literature. They're talking about literature, but some of the same themes are probably there. I think you'd enjoy it.
Yeah, it's absolutely going to be the next thing I read. I can't believe I managed to spend so long writing this book without coming across that.
Right. So she's also kind of, as you say, going through this, inner journey at this very crucial moment in her life. Tell us a little bit more about that. That's what you guys were just talking about.
Sure. Yeah. As I was writing it, I couldn't quite. Her actions were often so sort of inexplicable to me. I was like, is anyone going to buy this? That she was like interested enough in this customer to go looking for him and caring this much. And, I totally agree. It really is. I spent 4 years as a bookseller, and I mean, the customers, like, God bless them, they're the best part of the job, right? I mean, they're people who care about books. Which, like, what else could you ask for? But yeah, it's so fascinating to just get that one glimpse of their life and really start to, imagine what else is happening. As I was writing, I really sort of felt that, or maybe it wasn't as I was writing, but at a certain point, it started to become clear to me that what maybe, I as the author can make up this interpretation, but anyone else can interpret something differently. But what she's really after with Vietri is, I think she's someone very lost and not really knowing how to give her life meaning or make choices or shape her life, which I feel like is a big sort of your thing that happens when you're 25 and you're out of college, if you've gone to college, and then, you're just like, is this it? Like, what else was I supposed to do? What should I be doing? And I think that for her, Vietri sort of represents this like a shortcut to learning how to live a meaningful life. These books he's ordered and the things he's learned, she sort of assumes will be able to give her the answers. And I think part of the realization of the book is there's not really a shortcut, like, to build a meaningful life. It's very hard and it takes a really long time, and that sucks, but we all have to do it.
Yeah, I felt like her, she seemed very unmoored, and so did her family in some ways. When you look at like the cousins in particular, I think there was this one line where there's one of them says something like, no one really cares to hire you because you haven't lived anything until you're 40 or something. It was something to that effect. But it's almost like discounts anything that you've lived up until that point. I got the sense that she was also around folks that were trying to figure it out, right?
Yeah.
I was wondering to what extent she thought she could get some sort of direction from her family, or maybe she never, she didn't think that she could, because she was almost fearful of what those interactions would be.
Yeah, I think the family was so interesting to write for me, because I should say the book is also set in 2011, which I also can't believe is 10 years ago. But, you know, right after the financial crisis, which was, you know, especially devastating in Italy, and it took a long time to recover. But she's sort of among this generation of extremely overeducated people without very many job prospects. You know, most of them, if they're working, have like contract jobs, or they're still in school. And that's sort of the economic reality of Italians of that generation. And I think that it is wonderful how much they, you know, revere the old and knowledge, and that's great. But they don't really have this like 25-year-old CEO, entrepreneur, founded this own company culture that we're so obsessed with in America, which I think is good in some ways, but also, you know, bad in some ways, because I think that there are a lot of people adrift. You know, this is obviously not just Italy. This happens in lots of countries and lots of places, but and also happened in America in the post-financial crisis years. And then, you know, now we're having another generation of college graduates going out into nothing, or high school graduates, or, you know, this has been, you know, 2 years of that now. So, you know, I think it's you know, you like to think that, you know, this is sort of an inner matter, but it's also economic. You know, these forces shape people's lives in really real ways that are, you know, hard to see when you're living it. But
yeah, and also, I mean, just to touch on that point too, like, you have to wonder, would she have even been able to go on this journey if she didn't have the financial support that she had? Right.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of luxury there too. I mean, I say that, but it was also as a result of her mother's illness, right? Which is like devastating when you learn that. So it's, yeah. I mean, she's again, like, Gabrielle to me seems like someone who I find very familiar, but maybe because I could see myself in some ways in her, in that journey. And I think that a lot of readers will also be able to see themselves reflected in terms of like that doubt and that searching and that fear of actually taking root somewhere, which I felt that from her. I felt like she was just constantly, I don't want to say sabotaging relationships, but certainly she was like, she had no intention of being permanent anywhere, it felt like. And I think a lot of folks would be able to relate to that too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's something I relate to too. And I think especially for her in the Italian context with her family there, I meant to say this earlier, but it's also extremely specific because Italian families are very up in each other's business. Like I say this in the book, but there's no Italian word for privacy. They say ill privacy, like the English word. Like, what a foreign concept. And so, you know, she's a character who's an only child. And I think that, you know, I really think the only way forward is through, you know, not to be sappy, but like, you know, having relationships and having love in your life and surrounding yourself with people who care about you and who you care about. But it also is really hard to give up that autonomy when you decide to do that. It can be really, you know, like annoying sometimes, like best case scenario, you know, but you know, in the end, I think it's worth it. But, you know, that's something everyone needs to sort of come to terms with their own relationship to that.
Yeah, I thought that her relationship with her cousin, Andrea, I thought that relationship was something that could potentially be like a valuable relationship for her. Not just, you know, as a way for her to try to find Vietri. And I was, you know, I enjoyed watching the two of them together, the two of them interact. And yeah, it's just anyway, I'm just like praising. Was
the Vietri Project your title?
It was, yeah. I think I got really lucky because that was always the title I used. And at no part of the process, you know, I'd always heard like publishing advice, like, you're not going to get to keep your title, like your agent's going to change it, then the editor's going to change it, then the marketing department's going to change it. But yeah, no one ever even suggested we change it, which I feel really lucky about because I truly could not have imagined another title.
Right.
But yeah, I really was able to stay coherently the Vietri Project all the way through.
Because you couldn't have called it Finding Vietri. You couldn't have called it Looking for Vietri.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
But there's definitely the element, sounds like of a detective novel in here as well.
Uh-huh.
Using all your, research chops and her following this trail of all these little clues and breadcrumbs everywhere. And also the inner, I like that quote in detective fiction about, the good detective doesn't work the case works the detective. I like that whole notion.
Oh, that's a wonderful quote. I wish I had that while I was writing. Yeah, that was intentional. I really wanted it to function as a mystery novel. I mean, I don't want to oversell the genre aspects. Like, I think if all you read are mysteries, like this might not, hit the same notes, but I really did want it to function as a mystery novel in a lot of ways. And partly that was because the book I'd written before was maybe accused of being a little plotless, and I was like, well, I'm going to have a plot this time. It's going to be a mystery plot. And I mean, not that it's especially plotty. I think I said that to my agent and she laughed. She was like, do you think this is a plotty book? It's like, maybe for me it is. Anyway, so the other reason was that I was reading a lot of mysteries. Like, they're fun to read, right? It's really just such a satisfying type of book to read. Like, you both know where you're going and you don't know where you're going. And I had found out about this when I was in college. There was this class taught that I never personally took, but I just like read the course description and was obsessed with it, called Novels of Biographical Detection, where the detection is the detection of another person's life. So it's one character trying to find out the life story of another character. And I was like, wow, that's the best premise for a book I've ever heard. And a lot of books actually fall into this, like Absalom, a lot of Eric Ambler books that I started reading.
Demetrios.
What?
Coffin for Demetrios.
Yeah, Coffin for Demetrios was a huge book for me while I was writing this. The Quest for Corvo. I'm trying to remember some others, but yeah, there's a wonderful book by Roberto Bolaño called A Distant Star. So those books were really like guidestones for me. And well, it's not so much a like strict genre mystery novel. I did try to play with some things. Like, I have some characters who show up who end up, they were like the red herring. So I was like, as soon as they were out, they were just like gone, and it was like goodbye forever. And so I did try to like have little tropes throughout the book.
Right. Has either of you ever read, there's a wonderful book kind of along the same lines called He Died with His Eyes Open by, the author's name is Derek Raymond. And I guess you'd call it a detective novel, but it's a really brilliant piece of work. It's about a detective, just very quickly, a detective in London, and we never learn his name. It's always nameless. And his whole job is investigating, the murders of derelicts and prostitutes and people that society has kind of tossed to the side. And in the opening scene of the book, he's called to a crime scene, and it's in England, of course, and it's pouring rain. And there's this, what appears to be like a homeless guy lying face up in the park. And so he takes the case, and it turns out that this guy who ended up this way had this absolutely fascinating life, and he'd written this massive manuscript. And anyway, just to really, that process of going back into a life where the appearance doesn't match the reality is a really interesting trope, as they say.
No, I'll add that to my reading list too. I'm getting so many.
Yeah. Do you mind if I ask Melissa a question or two real quick?
Absolutely.
Melissa, can you tell us a little bit about just about the novel for the people who are watching who may not be familiar with your work. Can you talk a little bit about the affairs of the Falcons, and also maybe
Sure.
about what you're working on now?
Yeah, so The Affairs of the Falcons is about an undocumented Peruvian woman living in New York in the 1990s, and she's trying to just keep her family afloat. What am I working on now? I am trying to finish up this manuscript and get it to my agent in the next couple of weeks. I have no idea if I'm going to do it, but it's a story about a mother and a daughter. It's 5 years after the death of the patriarch and their family, and they're sort of still navigating life after that loss.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, maybe you could talk a bit. I'm sure you have some more questions for Nicola, but can you both talk a little bit about your influences as writers? You know, where are you drawing upon? Who are some of the people that were important to you?
Sure. Should I go first and then?
Yeah.
Okay. Everyone should read Melissa's novel. It's absolutely amazing. I've already said that. But so my influences, it's such a hard question. I've always read a ton, so I'm sure, you know, everything you read influences it. For this book specifically, my big influences that I was sort of thinking about and engaging with were Eric Ambler, W.G. Sebald, especially Austerlitz, and also the work of Nicole Krauss. Her novel Great House was a big inspiration. And Rachel Cusk's Outline series was also really sort of formative while I was reading it. And then just sort of more broadly speaking, authors that have been really important to me are, you know, Margaret Atwood, Edith Wharton, Michael Ondaatje, Roberto Bolaño. You know, I read a lot of Murakami, a lot of Orhan Pamuk. Yeah, I could go on and on, but yeah, those are probably the big ones. I'm sure I've forgotten like 3 major influences, but I'll stop there.
Yeah, I guess for me, Cristina Garcia's work has always been very influential. Mario Vargas Llosa. But honestly, like I could do as much reading as I want. For me, what really influences and inspires my work are the people that I surround myself with. So my community, and my family, my friends, my coworkers, my writing community too. I get a lot of inspiration from the poets in my life, Ty Freedom Ford being one of them. So yeah, those are my major influences. And when I sit down and I get to the page, I think of them, and I think about, you know, what it is that I hope to communicate through my work.
Awesome. And Nicola, have you sold the inevitable film rights yet?
Not yet. Would you like to buy them?
I'll give you $10 US.
I probably should run this through my agent.
Yeah. She'd take her 20% or whatever it is.
$8.
Wait, Nicola, so I have one last question, because I guess we're going to open up to Q&A at some point soon. Just looking at the time. Do you, and this is more, I guess, like of a general question, but I get the sense that Gabrielle will not necessarily ever settle down or take roots, but that's because I feel like most of us are on a journey and are always sort of seeking. But is this person the kind of, well, what do you think? Do you think that we are always, in fact, on a journey, or do we all get to some place where we feel a sense of contentment with our work and with what we do?
Oh my gosh, that's such a deep question. Yeah, I think it's more that I think we're all always on a journey, right? But I think you can have times of settledness and contentment, and for some people that's their whole life. I think that she might find that at times in her life, but I do think that she'll probably be on a journey for a long time. I mean, I feel quite settled now, for the first time in, a long time. I'm married, I have a job, we have an apartment, but one thing I did notice about myself in my years when I was more sort of traveling and wayward is the more I traveled, the more I could just imagine never settling, if money was permitting. But yeah, I think it is sort of an impulse, but it's also a choice, so.
Mm.
It's interesting how there are like these, these very crucial crossroad kind of moments, and you look back and, things that seem, just occasional or accidental somehow form the framework of this, what follows. It was interesting. I was in Paris. My wife and I went there over Christmas a year ago, right before the pandemic hit, and we'd always wanted to go. And we went to that wonderful bookstore, Shakespeare and Company, and I was reading about the history of that store, and through the war, through the occupation, and Sylvia Beach and Joyce and all that fascinating stuff. And they were talking about this program that they've had for since the store's inception, of allowing young students or young writers to live in the bookstore, and then you in exchange for working a couple of shifts or something like that. And I'm thinking, wow, wouldn't that have been cool, in my early 20s, to be over there smoking French cigarettes and drinking way too much coffee and immersed in James Joyce or whatever. Yeah, you can tell I'm a recovering English major. You guys probably were too. Yeah.
I was, yeah. No, that sounds like the dream to me too.
Doesn't it sound like fun? Yeah, I'm 51, and it still sounds like it might be a good time.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean,
Throw it
what's
all
the
to the
point
wind
of
and go
doing
back
it in
there
10 or
and-
20 years? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's also really interesting to to be in a culture, being in London, which was really great. I'd never been there before, and going to the bookstores. And I mean, nothing against America, but you see, it was just refreshing to go into their equivalent of what a Barnes and Noble would be. See all these like pointy headed, really interesting novellas, like big stacks of, and people like Sebald and, I guess what you'd call, kind of connoisseurs choices here in the States. A lot stacks of Bolaño everywhere, just a very educated and engaged public, it seems. It's just very refreshing to see that.
Yeah.
I don't know where I'm going with that.
No, people who read, they're the
It can
best.
still be part of your
Yeah.
journey, Patrick. It can still be part of your journey.
Yeah. Well, tell me about you were both winners of a writing fellowship, right? How did that work? Were you in the same place at the same time, or was there a writer's colony or retreats and things that you could go to, or was it not as romantic as that?
It was not really a
Not
retreat.
romantic.
No, well, there was fellowship. It was for emerging writers, so none of us had published a book based in New York. That was the only qualification. Like, you couldn't have published a book, you had to be living in New York City, but like any of the 5 boroughs. And and while it wasn't, it was a little bit of money, it like allowed me to like put down a deposit in a room and move out of a bad living situation. But it wasn't like life-changing. I think it was $5,000. So like, none of us quit our jobs, but it was like helpful to have that. But mostly it was the fellows, and we had a monthly dinner together where we would meet other writers or agents or editors who would just sort of give us intros to the publishing industry. But the other big thing was the writing space. So, I went there after work, like 1 or 2 days a week, and I'd go on the weekends. I actually remember, Melissa, do you remember the time we were locked out?
Yes.
It was this like, I think it was like February in New York, and it was so cold that the center was closed on the weekends, but we had like a key to get in through a side door, and we both showed up there at the same time. but our keys wouldn't work. Like the door, I think it was so cold, the door had like jammed shut and we couldn't get it open. So Melissa called her husband who came, and I don't know what magic he did to the door, but he got it open for us and we were able to go in and work.
I swear that place was haunted too.
It was a very haunted vibey building. It was a very, very old building in Midtown. Very creaky. Our writing space was on the 8th floor, I think. So there was an elevator you would take up and it was like this big.
Yeah, covered in pages. Right?
Yeah.
And stuff. It was really, now the space is beautiful. It's in Brooklyn. It's just like, it's like
very light filled.
Gorgeous. Yeah. Gorgeous.
Yeah. The space, when it was there, it was like there was like 3 space heaters in the writing space and everyone would like steal one and bring it like right in front of them.
You have to suffer for your art. That's it's the idea. Wow. So what about the bookstore scene in New York? I mean, the Strand is still there, of course. And do you both go and hang out at bookstores?
Yeah, I mean, it's been hard during the pandemic, but fortunately a lot of them are open now to browsing, but almost all of them were able to like have pickup service during, and I was so impressed how adaptable they all were. So my local now is Books Are Magic, since I live in Carroll Gardens, but Melissa's is also a wonderful bookstore called Word.
Which is great. Yeah. And same, like they've been able to somehow manage through the pandemic, and the community here is very supportive of the bookstore, I think. So it's been good.
Yeah. How have you both done just creatively and mentally during this crazy ass year that we've just experienced, after, Barbara and I have, talked to probably several hundred writers in the last year, since we're doing these Zoom programs, and everybody has a slightly different take on how they've adjusted to this. Is that something you guys feel comfortable talking about? Or
yeah, so I like, for me, in terms of writing, my writing life, I would actually write on the subway on my commute to work. I had like a 45 minute commute, like ride on the subway. Wow. So I would drop my kids off at school, hop on the subway, and like write, and then I would go home in the evening and like type up my stuff, or on the weekends. And so when the pandemic hit, I didn't have that commute anymore. Like it like cut into my writing time. And I mean, what's my commute now? Like literally like 4 feet, 5 feet, right from where I sleep, basically. So so I had to just find 20 minutes, half an hour a day to sort of keep writing. But it's tough, right? Like I have a full-time job. I've got 2 kids who are doing remote learning half the time. And you're not just like teaching them, the rules of grammar or, subtraction. Like you're also tech support, like, right? Google crashes, like what browser should they be using instead or something, where's the dongle that's gonna like,
how old are they?
For their iPad, 8 and 5.
Dios mío.
Yeah. So there's that. You're also like the cook, and I'm a lawyer. Like that's my day job, and so it's not like I have the most, the easiest job. Yeah. So for me, finding the 20 minutes, 30 minutes a day to write has been like a necessary, because it's the only. If I don't get that time, I'm not a happy mom, and I'm not a happy coworker. So I need that time. So that's sort of like.
Do you lock yourself in the bathroom?
No, I don't. My kids, they've never not known me they've always known me as a writer. And so they know that when I'm in my writing space and I have my headphones on, they know that I am writing, and they know to leave me alone. So they go to dad, or they just play on their iPads. I'm sorry, but like, there's no limit on screen time in this house. Nicola?
How about you, Nicola?
Yeah, every time I feel bad about like not having time to write, I'm just like, think of Melissa. Like so yeah, I don't have kids, but I do have a full-time job, and so I didn't write on my commute. So for me, it wasn't that different. I've always pretty much only written on the weekends. What is hard is sort of being trapped in the apartment. So now I like work at my desk and I write at my desk or on the couch. Let's be honest, like I mostly work and write on the couch. And yeah, it's just sort of clearing that mental space that's been a little hard. And for most of it, I was like on the same laptop. But yeah, so that's been a challenge. I mean, I think the bigger thing was just sort of how much free floating anxiety and just sort of
Right.
worry for, I was going to say like our country, but also just humanity from this last year has really been something to contend with. But, you know, I was also glad to be keeping busy and like, you know, I was editing this book and I was doing the copy edits and I was, you know, there's a lot of sort of stages. So it was nice to have something busy and to look forward to. But yeah, the other hardest part was just not being able to like go write at cafes because that was a big thing I would do just to like get out of the house. And now it's like, nope, you have no, like, this is it. There's nowhere else to go. But you know, as these things go, I've felt very, very fortunate this last year. You know, I'm able to work remotely, and so it's been a challenge. And I am, but it could be worse. I mean, everything could always be worse. But yeah, I'm sort of interested to see what comes out the other end of this from writers and for our culture.
Absolutely. I mean, it's funny because I can only imagine, you know, being a debut novelist with you know, this, it's so exciting, and you know, you're getting all this great press, it's wonderful, but then you can't really go out on the road and do your victory lap yet.
Uh-huh.
But what's interesting that we're finding, you know, from a bookseller's perspective is, you know, because we would have, oh gosh, almost 200 in-store events a year, you know, if not more, and you know, book discussion groups and very community oriented, and you know, we've had to shift to this new way, which has been a really interesting challenge in a lot of ways. You know, as you're saying at the beginning, you know, they might not have sent you to Arizona, but still we get a chance to talk. And whereas we might have had, you know, 50 people in the store or whatever, this program and others like it, you can reach people all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so it has its benefits, you know, and also I find that the discussions can take on kind of an interesting, somewhat esoteric tone sometimes, you know, and the programs have an odd intimacy to them. You know, we get a little voyeuristic glimpse into Melissa's space there, and we can read what's on her bookshelf, and I can see the Roberto Bolaño books on your shelf. And so it's kind of fun, you know, it's a different energy, but it's good too. And I think once things all shake out, I predict there'll be a mixture of both. Although I hope the publishers don't get really cheap, like I suspect they will, and say, we don't have to send anybody out on the road anymore. We'll just put them on Zoom.
I think there is something very special to in-person events that will come back. But I agree that it's been so wonderful to be able to connect with people over Zoom in this way. So
right. I'm jonesing for live music. I don't know about you guys. Well, let's see. I think we're just about out of time here. I don't really have any specific questions coming in from people watching. Just you know, people thanks for introducing these new writers. Sounds very interesting, and people are excited about the book. Before we kind of log off here, have you started work on anything new yet?
Yeah, you know, you never want to say too much because you don't want to jinx it, but I am working on something, and you know, basically all I know so far is that it's going to take place in my hometown of Oakland, California, and I'd like to follow some characters over a couple decades.
Cool. That's very good. Well, Melissa, any parting questions or comments or?
No, I just recommend everyone, you know, obviously read Nicola's book. Page 78, especially, is my favorite.
Write it down. And you just got a fantastic, as Barbara said at the very beginning of the program, you just got a terrific New York Times review. I read it just before we got started. That's great. Congratulations.
Thank you. It was amazing. I sort of was expecting a publication day that would be sort of quiet, and I woke up to that email, and it was a great feeling. I'm not gonna lie.
Well, guys, thanks so much for spending this hour talking with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for hosting us. And thank you again, Melissa.
Yay. Thanks, Nicola. Congrats again.
All right. You guys have a wonderful evening.
All right. You
Thanks
too.
everybody
Thanks
for
again.
watching on Facebook. Yeah. All right. Bye, guys.
Night.
Good night.